إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد. Hijab states in his discussion with حقيقة and Zorpsis that in today's culture people confuse assertiveness with arrogance. So he appeals to Sharia and the Quran to show that assertiveness is indeed part of the Quranic discourse. Now it's true, of course, that many Westerners would not approve of the way an assertive preacher of Islam would offer what he has to offer, calling for the only true path of salvation. They would indeed confuse it with arrogance, but the question that he seems to have neglected altogether here is why? Why would they suffer such a confusion? The reason, Hijab, is because the very setup of your discourse and the nature of the debate you've agreed to take part of so you can offer it to them makes it so. I'm sorry, but you don't come to them under the general notion that you and your opponent are equals intellectually and epistemologically, and that you both have equal rights to offer what you believe, argue for it and defend it, and that if indeed they manage to refute your propositions on that debate, then you would be obliged by virtue of its very nature to admit that what he has is the truth and that you've been mistaken all along. You don't engage with the subjects of your da'wah under such a general notion of propositional discourse and equal merit, and then blame the audience for thinking that it reflects your arrogance when you employ such loud, proud and assertive performance in such a debate. Of course you would come off as arrogant. Of course. You were not invited to that place to teach those people what the proper belief should be like. You were invited to propose some theoretical grounds for accepting Islam and see if they could stand the test of refutation and scrutiny. Okay? And since all theory can, in principle, be refuted, then if indeed yours did get refuted, then you should be humble enough and honest enough to admit that it has and just shut your mouth and go home. Or at least let the audience decide for themselves who had the upper hand, who had the better theory, and whose theory made it to the end of the debate without getting effectively damaged. That's it. That's the intellectual context in which you were expected to offer your da'wah on that occasion, and that's what the Greek tradition of debate has done to our da'wah in the West in general, wallahu musta'an. That's what philosophy has done to it, Hijab, whether you like it or not. You need to have the intellectual courage and honesty to admit that this is what your commitment to the Greek tradition of debate and argumentation has done to da'wah. Okay, whatever you think you have, whatever you believe you're offering people, is just your theory, your worldview, so to speak. What you and like-minded people think about the world. And if that's the case, then you need to admit that it is possible for you to be wrong. Okay, just as it is possible for your opponent. Your entire belief system could be wrong from the bottom up. In fact, both your system and his could be false altogether. Okay, so all that a refutation of his arguments would do is show that his position is wrong, not that your religion is the truth necessarily by entailment. No, in fact, it wouldn't even refute his entire system necessarily, rather it would only show that he failed on that occasion to defend it. Because obviously, other proponents of the same belief system have done differently on different occasions in its defense. You have tons of literature and recorded debates to attest to that. And it's all out there for the public to see for themselves. So if you're someone who has the inclination, or let's just say the hobby or the appetite for watching such debates, then you will not stop at Hijab's debate with so-and-so. Okay, obviously, no matter how fun you had watching it, how much fun you had watching it, or how entertaining you found it to be, you would be consuming them like Hollywood movies, perhaps even binge watching them like TV shows, just as Hijab has drawn the analogy in his own words. The general overarching sentiment would be that these are at best two equal debatable worldviews or doctrines or belief systems about reality, about the world, that have had a long history of philosophical engagement, argumentation, counter-argumentation, refutation, and deliberation, with neither of the proponents of either sides of the divide ever being able to settle the discussion in favor of their own, in favor of either of those doctrines once and for all. Centuries have gone past in that ongoing debate, and that's where we are. They couldn't settle it. Nobody could. How could they? It simply cannot be achieved in an intellectual context where both doctrines are presented as theoretical propositions in the very grounds upon which either of them is erected. Okay, a theoretical proposition. If the very idea that the world was indeed created at all is a theory or a philosophical proposition, then there is no moral, ethical, or deontological commitment or pressure upon a philosopher who disagrees with it to accept it. Neither. None at all. There can be none. Where would it come from? You make your proposition, I disagree with it, and that's that. That's it. Nobody's the wiser. Okay? I'm on at least an equal merit to you intellectually on this subject matter from the word go, before you even present your case. Okay, that's how it's all presented. You're not here to teach me or to school me. You're rather here to apologize for embracing your faith, and if at all, I, the secular philosopher, would be the one to school you about the depth and breadth of the philosophical disagreements on each and every little bit of the belief system you so proudly preach. Okay, that's it. That's the context you've submitted yourself to, holding such a debate, Hijab. So to think that you, or any other Muslim apologist, would be able to split your particular debate from that overarching background of profound sophistry and get people to accept your assertions and the force you present them with just because of your charisma or your skills as a performer or your smarts and your wits, you're fooling yourself. You're fooling yourself, brother. Indeed, some may get charmed by those qualities in your person as you performed on that day, but those very same people could just as easily get duped and magnetized by other players in the very same field from the opposing team. And if it's all about the entertainment, then I'm sorry to break it to you, but atheism in its very principle is far more entertaining than Islam. A system where I'm existentially free to be whoever I wish to be or to do whatever I wish to do, and to be my own God, so to speak, is definitely far more appealing to that audience and can provide way more entertainment and satisfaction than a system that forces everybody into lifelong submission to one man. Of course, in reality, there is no such thing as freedom. Okay, what they would actually do is submit themselves to yet another cage, but they would at least feel free to choose what cage they wish to lock themselves up into. A cage to which they would not be committed for life anyway. Okay, they could always shift it at will to yet another cage of their own choosing at any given time without suffering eternal consequences after death. Of course, they would love that. Okay, they would love that. They would prefer it, given the very culture you're referring to. But to be told that there is a cage that comes from above, from the one and only ultimate authority upon all things, the Lord of the cosmos himself, one that everybody is required to submit themselves to for life on pain of eternal damnation in hellfire, and that we have theoretical propositions that show that to be the case, then I'm sorry, brother, but apart from those who already embrace that belief, nobody would be entertained by that. Nobody at all. Your assertiveness and your firmness would thus be little more than a nuisance, okay? A most unwelcome aberration, a turn off, so to speak, okay? As a secular or a humanist, I could always take comfort in the huge blanket of historical debate and the centuries-old philosophical legacy on that very subject matter itself that exists in the very academy you are so keen on joining, dismissing you as little more than an arrogant clown, okay? What are you even thinking talking like that? Who do you think you are anyway? Alright. Now, I'm not claiming that this is how everybody from the opposite camp in that audience would be feeling about your performance or your arguments on such a debate. There's probably going to be some secularly uncommitted attendees who might feel impressed by your showmanship somehow and who just might consider joining your camp. I'm also not claiming that everything you said or did on that day, on that debate, was wrong, of course. Or that it wasn't the proper way to present that subject matter or to invite to it. Of course not. I'm rather saying that the context of philosophical debates is not the proper context to place to present our case for Islam. And it's definitely not the context to be assertive or forceful about anything at all. I mean, you're a big fan of William Lane Craig, right? Okay, when have you ever seen him perform like you did on that debate? And more importantly, why is that the case? Because he cannot be as theoretical or dramatic as you can in presenting his case? No, obviously not. The reason, brother, is that the very nature of the dialogue itself does not permit it. Does not permit it. It just doesn't fit. Nobody enters a public debate to get schooled or scolded into quitting their fallacies and false beliefs and surrendering all their defenses. Obviously not. They enter them to get a chance to publicly humiliate their opponents. Okay? Both sides of a debate are offered by design such a chance, equally building on a sophist epistemology that they are both epistemically warrantable, both positions, and that in principle they both have equal chance of upturning their opponent's case. Just as it would be the case in a courtroom, where two opponents are offered equal grounds in the eyes of the judge to make their cases and to defend them. This design or setup for the discourse is only fitting for a propositional case, not for an assertive case. A case whose proponent readily admits that he might fail to defend it. In which case, he would have to concede to the opponent's case or to at least reconsider his own. That's fitting in an academic setting where natural or human sciences are taught, because a theoretical proposition is the business of academics. Okay, it's what they do. We gather data, we propose theories or models to explain and organize the data, believing in advance that our models would be incomplete by necessity, and that we need the help of other fellow academics to draw our attention to areas where that we may have overlooked, or shortages, or to aspects of the theory that the model or aspects of the theory or of the model that need to be modified. Okay, we want that, we desire that. The entire theory or model could even be blown away or superseded, no problem. We would more than welcome such an engagement with our colleagues in the academy in such a context, if that's the subject matter. This is so because the very nature of the subject matter of our study, we all know in advance that we could easily be wrong. By the very nature of the subject matter, we could all be wrong. Okay? In fact, sometimes we even think we're probably wrong before we even engage with anyone. Okay? We, however, publish what we have only as a starting point or a rough suggestion that invites further research. Okay? That's how proper, fruitful theoretical deliberation works in modern academy. Because the subject matter itself requires it. Because that's the only way any useful knowledge at all can be achieved on such issues. It's how sociology works, how psychology works, how useful, warrantable fields of natural science work. Okay, regardless of whether actual progress can be achieved in the overall accumulated knowledge, ontologically speaking, in this or that field by this or that theory. Okay, sometimes a theory is better or more favorable to the academy because it's more helpful, more useful instrumentally in practical applications within the field, not because its ontological assumptions or metaphors are a better match for reality, but that's another story, of course. My point here, brothers and sisters, is that propositional engagements and deliberations in academic contexts are only useful, encouraged even, when the subject matter is as such a theoretical subject. The case you're making would then indeed be a theoretical proposition that you're offering, readily believing in advance that it could easily turn out to be all wrong, top to bottom. No problem. Okay? In which case you would be justifiably grateful to your colleague for pointing your attention to holes and glitches in your system. Okay, you can easily let go of it and find another one, think of another one, no problem. Even if you didn't think of another one at all, if you didn't reconsider the matter altogether, if you changed your career altogether, you wouldn't lose anything, no problem. Okay. Now the problem with the Western Academy, brothers and sisters, as I've shown in different contexts, is that it inherited a profoundly sophist theory of knowledge from the ancient Greek academy. The theory that underlies all academic practice of philosophy since the times of the ancient Greeks is that all knowledge claims, whatever their subject matter may be, are just as refutable in principle as they are warrantable. Even the claim that some beliefs are necessarily true by virtue of their subject matter alone and cannot be refuted, even such a claim is required by that sophist theory to provide theoretical warrant for its validity. Otherwise, a philosopher would be fully justified in rejecting it as little more than blind belief. Okay, that warrant might be an analogy, a deductive argument, or an inductive or abductive argument of some sort. In a strict Aristotelian sense, it should rather be syllogistic, purely deductive, if someone seeks to achieve certainty or finality in the way that its results are to be determined. Greek logic was devised to offer a formal manner in which such arguments can be built and proposed in a manner that would guarantee such certainty. Okay, or that's what Aristotle, at least, and his students believed. However, Aristotle himself forgot that even the need to use logic itself as he formulated it, was, according to the tradition, a mere theoretical proposition that demanded warrant. Okay, and since it was taught to students in that ancient academy that the only rational resort to refute the sophists was to employ formal logic in its syllogistic form, it became a synonym to rationality and rational deliberation. And to this day, when someone like Hijab says, we need philosophy for da'wah, he would mix it with rational argumentation and refutation in his very principle, and refutation of false doctrines and beliefs and such, saying that we're only doing philosophy when we do so. Okay, and I've shown in more places than one that by no means is this the case. We wouldn't be able to build a case against philosophy itself at all as a practice, if indeed it was synonymous to the very notion of rational deliberation or argumentation. Obviously not. Philosophy, as inherited by the Western Academy, is, as I've shown, a tradition of sophist deliberation and engagement, founded on an objectionable theory of knowledge from the word go. We Muslims cannot and should not accept the claim that every knowledge claim requires premises upon which it should be founded and by which it could be justified, regardless of its subject matter. We should not be required to offer some syllogistic argument in support of our position in this respect. We do not accept that requirement. Neither should we submit to it, and you're a sophist if you disagree. End of story. Our position in this regard is not to be labeled the theory of knowledge to begin with. Okay? It's how every sensible person learns anything at all about reality. There are indeed beliefs that cannot be refuted, and everyone who rejects them suffers from laughable entailments that can easily be shown to be so. On top of all such beliefs is, of course, the belief that you and I have indeed been created by someone who is perfectly capable, perfectly knowledgeable, and who is not himself the subject of creation. We know that to be true, just as we know the existence of the outside world around us to be true, rather than an illusion in somebody's mind. And just as we don't need to justify that knowledge by means of an argument or proposition, neither do we need to justify this belief. Equally, we can ridicule and shame those who claim otherwise, and that's demonstrably what Allah does in the Quran. And that's precisely where the assertiveness and the forcefulness of the Quranic discourse comes from. Allah is not suggesting a theory or a model about the world upon which the religion is to be founded. No. He is the creator of all that exists, and he is shaming the kuffar for committing themselves to practices that insult his name and that entail the opposite of what they already know to be the truth about him. The entailment itself is not in need for premises upon which it to be founded or deduced or warranted. It is clear as day. Yet they have been too occupied with learning the tradition of shirk and practicing it to sit back and think for a moment about the meaning of what they're doing. This is what we call ghafla, al-ghafla. And it's why the Quran states that it came with reminding, tadhkir, rather than teaching, ta'lim, when it comes to this issue, to this fundamental issue. Okay? فذكر إنما أنت مذكر فذكر إنما أنت مذكر يعني لست إلا مذكرا إنما أنت مذكر لست عليهم بمسيطر إلا من تولى وكفر فيعذبه الله العذاب الأكبر. We already know his existence and his worthiness of being worshipped alone with no partners is true. Okay? And can only be true. We only know that to be true. Okay? We already know it. So the job of a prophet is not to establish that knowledge itself propositionally or theoretically. No. The job of a prophet or a messenger is to remind the subjects of da'wah of its entailments and to build upon that reminder. This is the job of a Muslim da'iyah, a preacher, brother. He is not there to apologize by means of some propositional argument for having to embrace his religion, while being part of an academy that would see such a stance as a sign of irrationality or feeble-mindedness. No. He is there to remind those arrogant philosophers of the appalling entailments of their ways and to warn them against the outcome of their persistence in the fallacy, in the falsity. That's the job of the messenger you claim to be following, Hijab. So if you think you do a better job, you can do a better job inviting people to his religion, you might as well admit it and let us know what you really believe. Okay? Every mutakallim, Muslim apologist, suffers this entailment, brothers and sisters. This blasphemous entailment. The Prophet ﷺ and his followers did not do da'wah in this manner, proposing theoretical or philosophical arguments for the existence of the Maker first, and then proceeding to build upon them, arguing for the notion of prophethood itself, and then arguing from miracles for the validity of the Quran in this order. No. The Prophet didn't do that, and his disciples and his students didn't do that. So, do you guys think you know better than the Prophet and his companions? That's the entailment here. Now, this is the reason why the mutakallimun of old took pains in trying to show that the Quran's rhetoric is actually propositional, before it can be considered a testament of reminding or warning or such. It's why they all sought to show that the cosmological argument is right there in the book. Okay? You just need to look closely to find it. Ibn Sina as well felt the need to show that his burhan of contingency is there. Okay, for the very same reason. It cannot be the case that knowledge of the existence of the Maker requires such sophisticated philosophical propositions to be achieved as they have all committed themselves to, and yet the Quran comes with no such grounding, and the Lord addresses people in such a manner as though they already know that He exists. Okay? Where is the argument that if I fail to accept it, I would deserve such a harsh scolding for claiming that I didn't know or that I don't know? Where is it? Okay, and does it even make sense that some theoretical proposition should be such that if I fail to find it convincing, then I should deserve an eternity in hellfire for rejecting the truth? Come on, okay? This hijab is the very core of the so-called the problem of hell in philosophy of religion. I'm pretty sure you're aware of. Since you claim to be well educated of Western philosophy, Yani, this is where it actually comes from. The question of the existence of God is indeed the single most difficult question in all of philosophy, as every academic philosopher would tell you. The one with the most plentiful and most confusing literature ever. Tons upon tons of arguments, counter-arguments, objections, and objections to the objections, refutations of the refutations, in a bottomless pit or a sea without a shore. That's how it is, academically. Okay, that's what the discipline is like. And yet, you have the audacity to come to us with the claim that if we fail to accept your particular argument for it, we would deserve an eternity in hellfire. Obviously, something doesn't add up here. Okay, he cannot be so harsh in his punishment if this is really how people get to know that he exists at all. If this is indeed the proper discipline of knowledge where one can find that knowledge somehow, somewhere, then I could easily spend an entire lifetime and 3 more lifetimes upon it, studying that issue in that literature without ever going anywhere at all. So it seems that he shouldn't be punishing people at all for deciding, after having examined the Quran and whatever arguments you put forth for it, that they are not convinced that Islam is the truth. How can a belief that is thusly acquired be worthy of such an unimaginable judgment? Okay, this is the problem, simply put. This is the problem of hell, simply put. It is founded entirely on the sophist theory of knowledge I outlined earlier, brothers and sisters. By default, the academy teaches you that you have no reason at all to believe you are created and are being sustained by an omnipotent being until you've acquired some foolproof argument for that belief. Okay, and have put it to the test of philosophical debates too, okay, according to the tradition. An argument that is built according to the tradition and that is engaged upon, okay, and that is presented and proposed and discussed according to the tradition too. If you don't do that, then you're just another blind follower who has no warrant for their faith whatsoever. A blind follower, iman is-sufaha. Your faith then is not reasonable or rational at all. The problem follows directly from that theory, okay, from that theory of knowledge. Because obviously, not everybody can demonstrate the rationality of their faith in this manner. And not everybody should get convinced by whatever demonstration you manage to come up with or proposition you manage to offer. So what should become of me if I'm someone who has sincerely tried everything in my power to get convinced by all the arguments I laid my hands on and yet I failed? According to that theory, you can in fact be honest and sincere in claiming that you've seen no good reason whatsoever to believe that you were in fact created. Okay? You can be fully justified in taking an agnostic stance in this respect, in withholding judgment. Bertrand Russell notoriously said in an interview in a famous interview, that if he ever faced the Almighty, he would simply say, "Sir, why did you not give me better evidence? Why did you not give me better evidence?" This, brothers and sisters, is the fruit of that sophist tradition here. A millennia-old tradition of sheer sophistry on this most fundamental of all matters. Okay? Is what yielded such freaks of thought and such grave problems that no philosopher committed to the tradition as he should be can ever begin to respond to. This is what caused all that. The philosopher in that tradition and under that theory of knowledge is justified in believing that there simply is no evidence good enough for the kind of commitment and judgment this belief and its entailments are made worthy of in Islam. An eternity in hellfire. Okay? No proposition or argument in the syllogistic or the dialectic form from the analytic tradition or the continental or any other could possibly be such that if you don't accept it, then you deserve punishment after death. And what punishment? An eternity in hell. What are you even talking about? A lay person in philosophy who can make no heads or tails from that debate, like that guy Georges made an example of in the audience earlier, would have every right to think, I can hardly understand what you guys are saying when you debate publicly on the existence of God, and yet I'm faced with an eternal damnation in hell if I fail to acquire that belief the way that it is supposed to be acquired? How is that fair? And how does it make any sense to you at all? Well, it doesn't. Obviously, the first step in refuting that alleged problem, the problem of hell, is to reject that sophist theory of knowledge itself altogether, from the bottom up, okay, from its foundations. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not decree an eternity in hellfire as punishment for failing to think hard enough to know that He exists, brothers and sisters. He decreed it in punishment for choosing to fool oneself into believing that He is not worthy of being worshipped with no partner, not to mention believing that He did not exist at all. You commit the greatest lie to yourself and the gravest crime against His grace that can possibly be imagined when you choose to do that. This is so, not because it has the most formidable argument from deductive premises ever made. No, not at all. But because everything in your consciousness, your cognition, and your perception, everything you know tells you in no uncertain terms, in no ambiguous language, that you have been created by a wise, omnipotent, omniscient, and all-merciful Creator. One who is worthy of all submission, all glorification, all gratitude that you can possibly muster as a creature. Nobody needs to think, contemplate, or conjure up some more obvious facts to be employed as premises for this fact to be established in their minds. As a normal human being, you don't even need to consider the ridiculous entailments of denying His existence, regarding your very own existence and that of everything else around you, the entailments regarding those notions. This is the clearest of all facts that a human being knows since the day they start making sense of things at all. So choosing to reject it or doubt it can never be the outcome of rational, sensible thinking. It's necessarily the outcome of ill intent and bad inclinations of the heart. You simply don't want to see it for the ultimate truth that it is. You hate to admit it. You have to find some other explanation for everything around you apart from it being a pointer to this fact. Okay? You hate to admit it because you would hate to change your lifestyle the way that Islam teaches that you have to. This is it, brothers and sisters. This really is the only reason anybody might reject Islam after hearing about it. Fool yourself into believing that argument X or argument Y are not working and that there is not enough evidence all you want. He is omnipotent and omniscient, and He sees everything that happens in your heart and in your mind. Lie to yourself and to others all you want. You cannot lie to Him. Hide and cover up anything you want to cover up from people, but you cannot cover anything up from Him. Lie to yourself and to others all you want. You cannot lie to Him. And on that fateful day, you can rest assured that everything will be revealed. Everything. Everything you've ever hidden from others. Everything you've ever felt. Every hidden intent, emotion, motive, or desire you may have ever harbored, every single thing will be revealed. This is where the assertiveness of the Quranic discourse comes from, brothers and sisters. It is not here to propose some deductive or inductive argument from whatever happens to be the mainstream metaphysics of the world in your academy at any given time, for the existence of some abstract entity, abstract maker, and engage with you people in some endless Byzantine debate on whether or not that argument works or as required. No, I'm sorry, but that's not what our Prophet was sent to do. That's not what he was sent to do. He came with the ultimate exposition of the real reasons people have for rejecting the truth that he was sent with. Understand this, and you will immediately understand why the question of the existence of God or a maker or a creator has indeed become the single most undeterminable, unanswerable problem in all of philosophy. There is simply no other issue in human intellect that invites sophistry and self-deception as much as it does, as much as this issue does. No philosopher likes to think that a being to which he owes his entire existence and who can see his every condition, know everything he can possibly hide from others, is commanding him to live in sheer, unconditional, lifelong submission to another man besides himself, one whom he had chosen to be his messenger to all of humanity. They're simply too proud to even allow for this to be true. You're asking him, the great philosopher, to submit You're asking me, the great philosopher, to submit my mind and my entire being to the teachings and commandments of some Arabian fellow who lived somewhere in the 7th century? No way, man. No way, I'm not gonna do that. Not happening. It's the same arrogance that kept Iblis, Satan, from submitting to Allah's command for him to lay prostrate for Adam, and for which he was condemned for eternity. I should have been chosen for such an ultimate seat of intellectual authority upon people, upon humanity. I, the great philosopher, not that Arabian fellow. Okay, it was another fellow, of course, before Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it's always been the same malady, brothers and sisters, the same illness of the heart, the same hidden psychological motor beneath the entire debate. Okay, the philosopher is simply too proud to accept anything short of getting others to follow him. Okay. So you see, the Greek tradition, such as it is, dismisses a very important and very common case when someone sees the truth for what it is, and yet insists in sheer self-deception that they do not see it. The debate should persist for as long as one of the participants claims they do not see the opponent's position as valid or justifiable. There can be no such thing as accusing your opponent of denying what they know to be the truth. That's not part of the tradition. How would you know that to be the case anyway? Because you believe that claim X is self-evident and that every human being finds it to be true by innate sense and intuition, and so he must be lying when he claims that he doesn't see it as such? Okay, then go ahead and prove that to be true if you can. Make a case and argue for it. Alright? Some social psychologists did describe that condition of denial of what one knows to be the truth as in Leo Fistinger's principle of cognitive dissonance, terming it rationalization. However, being the students of that very academy that they were, they failed to acknowledge the extent, the depth and the breadth of that problem, the real cause behind it, and the way it has shaped the Western world for centuries. Under the realization that we suffer a dangerous contradiction, considering the consequences that come from embracing it, we seek ways to make what we know to be true look like a falsity. So we get rid of the deep trouble that comes with being aware of that self-contradiction. To get rid of the deep trouble that comes with being aware of that self-contradiction. Okay? We need to get rid of the dissonance. We do that largely without being aware that we're doing it. But if someone were to show us the inner workings of our subconscious minds and the actual motives that moved us to come up with those tricks and fallacies we committed to rationalize that contradiction, while stripping us from the interests, mostly social of course, that we have in preserving that cognitive system as it is, the inclinations or the desires that made us suffer the sense of dissonance in the first place, we would find no reason to deny that we actually did that. We'd find no reason to deny it. On the day of judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not only take the testimony of every one of us on what we've done, what we did, He would also gather every bit of what we've stored in our hearts and our minds. وَحُصِّلَ مَا فِي الصُّدُورِ. It will be gathered from within our hearts. And if someone were to deny that they did this or that, their mouths will be forced shut and their limbs will testify against them, will be made to testify against them. اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون. So there can be no denying anything at all on that day, anything whatsoever. All tricks will be exposed, all rationalizations busted, all pretenses and self-deceits brushed away. Everything will come out as it is, as it happened in your heart, in your mind, in your soul, in your spirit, and in your cognition. Nobody will even dare address Allah the way that Rasul claimed that he would. Nobody. The Quran is teaching this because most people need to be threatened by the horrendous price they will have to pay in the afterlife if they were to die with their backs to Islam. Yes, threatened. That's the word that I'm using. Nidara, Nadir, Indar. They need to know that if they manage to get away in this life with pretending not to know the truth about Islam and the validity of the message of the Quran, or needing more evidence for all of that, they will not be able to get away with it on that day when all will stand bare to be judged by their Maker. Allah knows His creatures more than they know themselves. He knows what it is exactly that keeps them from embracing the deen, from admitting that it is indeed the truth. So He addresses them with precisely what they need to hear. If they were to get nudged out of that elaborate lie they have forged for themselves and picked up from that deep cesspool of negligence and indifference they are submerged into. The Quran addresses the inner motives and desires that generate those rationalizations in people's minds, shifting the compass of heartly inclination towards fear from an eternal fate of damnation in those whose souls are not too far gone in arrogance and lust for worldly power. No worldly interest anybody may desire from keeping the false religion or the false doctrine could possibly weigh anything compared to an eternity of torture after death if they were to meet their Maker on that religion. Not everybody, however, is psychologically predisposed to see it that way. Alright? Now, I want you to look me in the eyes, Hijab, and tell me that this is the kind of discourse that could be tolerated in any academy of philosophy or whatever else. Like I said in the previous part, the Kalam method was devised to serve the desire that the Mutakallim has to present themselves as legitimate philosophers and intellectuals by the standards of the academy in their time, the academy they are so keen on joining. Alright? There is no way that the Mutakallim could ever do da'wah in the manner that the Quran addresses the kuffar under any circumstances in a public debate or elsewhere. Why? Because he ultimately desires to join them in the very thing that makes people follow them, which so happens to be the very same thing that he is supposed to kick them out of if they were to be saved at all. What is that thing, you ask? It's the Greek tradition of sophistry, loosely called philosophy. Listen to Hijab as he engages with people at the Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park. In one instance, he addresses some random atheist guy. He supposedly is inviting him to Islam. Alright? The discussion spanned almost 1 hour and a half, I think, and was uploaded in 2 confusing overlapping clips. The first one I heard, which turned out to be the part 2 really, starts with him saying, I want to treat you with respect right now. I want to see if your argument actually holds for scrutiny. Okay, I have a postulate. My postulate is... Okay, then he says, but my argument is as follows. There cannot be a set of only dependent things in existence. Now, you're saying that that entails modal collapse. Now, what do you mean by modality, etc.? Now, brothers and sisters, fast forward 20 minutes on that clip and he's saying, let me explain the position. I'm not a Thomist, but I'm pretty sure it's going to have to be similar. I'm saying the following. I'm saying what follows. In abstraction, like you said in essence. In essence, there's no intrinsic attribute in this bottle. Okay, he's referring to a bottle in his hand. There's nothing in this bottle, in essence, which has necessity in it. Okay, you agree with that? Which has existence in it? Okay, then he says, I know what you mean by this. And then he says, okay, and I'm not really sure that I can easily hear. I can't clearly hear what the guy is saying in response to him. You can hear Hijab's speech very clearly, but not the same is not true of the opponent, which by the way tells you of what the very purpose of this whole show is. Okay. Anyway, he goes on to say, I know what you mean by this, and then he goes essence and existence. What's the name of that guy? The one who wrote a book on Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas? Oh, Fulan explains in his book that Thomas Aquinas goes, that's how I understand, because that's how I understand Thomas Aquinas, through Phaser. I'm not sure if I hear it properly, Phaser or Fraser or whatever. No, I'm not a Phaserian anything. Yeah, he's one of the guys I look to. Yeah, what I'm saying, he distinguishes between essence and existence. Right? Okay, that's notwithstanding the point, because what I'm saying is, whether or not he gives the following example, is there a difference between a circle, the existence of it, and the essence of it, etc. Okay? All that so we can get the guy to finally concede that the bottle in his hand is contingent on Thomas Aquinas' view. Okay, now fast forward another 20 minutes, and he's saying, we're using a different language, but we're saying the same thing. You have to appreciate this. Now, and here the brother says, the opponent says, and I can hear him once at last, are you saying you agree with me? No, he says, Hijab says, no, listen to me. I appreciate one point. Maybe the third way by itself, I don't think that Thomas Aquinas, he expected one of these arguments to be sufficient by itself. I don't think so. I have read secondary source material that indicates, might be wrong, then something, and then he says, let me just make the point. I'm saying the following. Even if one agrees, he makes this distinction. I do strongly believe that in the third way, he's arguing for one necessary existence. Then something, and then he says, the most important point of this discussion, and listen, he says, the most important point of this discussion is the following. We have now come to a conclusion that the third way, okay, he agrees with the argument. The argument, it can be summarized as there cannot be contingent things alone in existence. I said there cannot be dependent things alone in existence. Fine, contingent things, dependent things, you agree with me with that, yeah? Then he says something, and then he goes, do you agree with that? The opponent says, yeah, on my something, I'm not, it's not clear. Do you agree with that? And and he says, on my something, I can't hear it properly. Sure, thank you. Hijab goes, I'm gonna go pray now because we're done. No, before you go and pray, the opponent says, no, before you go and pray, hold on. The reason his argument works is because there's a certain view of something that I again can't hear clearly, and then he says that you hold, etc. Now I want you to look me in the eye, Hijab, and tell me that was an exercise of da'wah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I dare you to make that claim. The funny thing, brothers and sisters, is that he titled that clip on his YouTube channel, "An Atheist Bumped into the Wrong Muslim." Seriously, the wrong Muslim? Because he did what exactly? You almost literally played a game of golf with him, brother. You both came out agreeing to a point that is nowhere near showing any atheist the falsity of their beliefs, your opponent or whoever else. You ended that long convoluted discussion on agreeing with the guy that no set of contingent things can exist alone. So what? So what? He still insisted that he had a different view of the argument and what it entails, which he naturally would if he were to agree with it at all. And even if he didn't have a different view, and he agreed entirely with what you understand it to prove, then what? Where would that take him? To agreeing that some abstract necessary thing exists in reality? Well, guess what? All atheists do believe in some form of necessary existence. It's just not the same thing that you believe in, or that you claim to believe in. So what? What do you think you achieved here, man? What? Seriously, what did you achieve? What are you doing? What are you really doing, brother? What is this? I'll tell you what he's doing, brothers and sisters. Look at the very title of the video and you'll get it. You'll get it all. The general impression that this is all supposed to give to the viewer, the impression for which he chose to upload that video at all, is that he's a well-educated student of philosophy. Okay? A well-educated, a qualified philosopher, not a lay person in philosophy. So what? Okay, so what? So you can't win in a debate with me. That's it. Find someone else to beat if you wish. But with me, sorry, you stand no chance. You bumped into the wrong Muslim. So is this what da'wah is about to you, Hijab? A match of philosophical knowledge? A contest to see who's the better read in philosophy? This is your understanding of the verse, ادعو إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن. Where is the way of your Lord, سبيل ربك? that you're supposed to be inviting people to in any of this? Where is it? Don't give me that mumbo jumbo about this being important so that the Western Muslim community would not be intimidated by atheists who employ philosophy in their attacks against Islam and stuff like that. No, I'm sorry. You know as well as I that this is not why you uploaded that video. And even if it were, the general image that this material reflects is that we Muslims need to be academic philosophers who spend their entire time engaging in sophist debates as such, on the hope of finally managing to establish some propositional argument from contingency that does not suffer from the critique and the scrutiny of the most capable atheist philosophers out there. Okay? In what way is this to be viewed as beneficial for the Muslim community in defending it against the social pressure of atheism and secularism? You couldn't possibly hope to do a better job dragging Muslims to atheism and secularism onto their noses, okay? And secular philosophy than that. Atheists should be grateful to you for that. وَلَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. I then watched the other clip. Okay, like I said, there were two clips for this discussion. I watched the other one, the longer one, which was supposedly part one, and it started with him bantering with him about Gottfried Leibniz. Here's how it started. You're not understanding what I'm saying here. Okay, and then something, and then he says, are you asking me to justify my premise? Are you with me here? Are you listening? He says, I'm very much with you, I'm here. And then he says, I totally agree with you on the fact that there's a great flesh that joins what I'm saying with the principle of sufficient reason spoken about by Gottfried Leibniz. I understand that, and I think everybody understands that. The academy understands that. And then, after something, he says, let me finish. But the academy also understands the distinction between these arguments. That's why they named them different things in all languages they have been articulated in. I'm saying that, for example, I got a peer-reviewed paper in the Philosophy of Religion journal, right? Which talks about the principle of sufficient reason. It's not seen as synonymous with the idea of Imkan or Burhan by Ibn Sina or whatever. And then he says, I agree. Okay, great. The opponent says, I agree, and to which he says, okay, great. Have you read Monadology? Have you read it? Addressing his friend, there were two guys, addressing the other guy, no, I haven't. He says, no, I haven't. Okay. Then he responds, so you're talking about something you have no knowledge about, effectively. All right. So now I ask every sincere, honest human being who has something in his heart that tells him that what Islam is and what da'wah is this da'wah ilallah? Is this, brothers and sisters, da'wah ilallah, ila sabili rabbik? A peer-reviewed paper on the philosophy of religion that talks about the principle of sufficient reason, and that it's not the same thing as Ibn Sina's Burhan. This is da'wah ilallah. Allahu Akbar. Fast forward yet another 30 minutes, and here's where he is. Here's where he's at. He says he's speaking a lot, but he's not saying anything. And then after a part, he says, at which point his friend, of course, Ali Da'wah, intervenes and laments one of the two guys for being a Christian who is siding with his friend the atheist, and scolds the atheist, telling him to be quiet and learn something from Hijab. Okay, Hijab is here to school you about philosophy, so shut up and listen. Okay, something as in philosophy, of course. Okay, and then after a part, Hijab says, my postulation is his postulation. All right, that's what he has. That's what he's arguing for. That's what's all this is all about. Hijab's postulation, Hijab's theory. This is what this da'wah is, brothers and sisters. It's not da'wah to Allah. He goes on to say, my postulation is that there cannot be a state of affairs where only contingent things exist. You say that's wrong. Why is it wrong? Okay, and he's starting to use force now. Why is it wrong? You said that there's modal collapse. Why is there modal collapse? You talked about modalities. You said I don't know what modalities are. Then you talked about David Lewis's modal realism. I've read his book. I know he dies in 1965 or whatever. To which the opponent commented saying, that's a great fact. You know when he died. He was actually making fun of him, but he missed out on that. Anyway. And he goes on to say, I know, yeah, he's acclaimed as one of the leading philosophers in, and then it's not clear. Then he says, excuse me, I've read his stuff. I know what he's talking about. I understand the distinction between what you call what you call it, possible words in instrumentalism and realism. And what his position is, I know that you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. I'm not talking about David Lewis. The opponent then says, I'm not talking about David Lewis, Aslan. Then he goes on, no, but you mentioned it. He mentioned it? Wow. So the entire point here is simply to show that guy, the guy that you know, and that to show him that you know and that you've read all those books he's referring to. Okay? That's what this is all about. So what? If you think you're impressing people, hijab, believe me, brother, you're not. You're not. There are literally hundreds, even thousands of atheist academic philosophers who can impress those very same people way more with what they've read and what they know and what they've published. At some point, he literally says, I've done a PhD on it, man. I've gone to Oxford and I've, etc. So don't tell me I'm not qualified, brother. You haven't got a degree, man. Who are you? Who are you? Speaking like that, okay? Okay, then he says, speak to me with respect. And remember one thing, I've been peer-reviewed. I've been peer-reviewed. You guys are lay people. Underqualified, not qualified. I'm peer-reviewed. I'm peer-reviewed. What? My God. And that's what it all comes down to, brothers and sisters. That's it. That's what it comes down to. I'm academically qualified. This man is sick. والله العظيم هذا رجل مريض. مريض أقسم بالله. مريض. I'm academically qualified to exercise the arrogance of a philosopher, and you, my opponent, are not. So shut up and listen and let me teach you some philosophy. That's it. That's what he's doing. That's his job here. That's what he's doing day and night. And so the message the Muslim community should be getting now is that in order to properly engage with an atheist, you have to be a PhD student at Oxford and have at least one paper published and peer-reviewed in a journal on the philosophy of religion. No, actually the message is that you need to come to hijab to help you. Okay, do that and you will be able to spend almost 2 hours with random people at Speaker's Corner bantering about Thomas Aquinas, Gottfried Leibniz, David Lewis, and of course Ibn Sina, and whether they agree about a couple of terms in modal logic or not. That's how you do da'wah bil-hikmati wal-mu'idhat al-hasana. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Even when the opponent attacked his argument on the grounds that it implied a sufficient reason, which on his belief should be God, of course, and there's no reason why it should be that, Hijab, and there's no reason in the argument why it should be that, Hijab insisted that he should deal with the argument in absolute isolation, as per the Greek tradition of debate, without invoking any additional propositions or beliefs that are held by the arguer. Okay? He said he didn't use the word God for once in his discourse, so his opponent should not invoke it. His argument does not include the word God. Okay, so what on earth are you doing there, man, anyway? What are you doing? What is that circus all about after all? Proving the mere abstract notion of necessity is not arguing for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or even for some real God that exists outside of the mind. To put it bluntly, you are not inviting that man to embrace Islam. Okay, so stop fooling people into thinking that you are. You're not inviting him to get out of kufr. You don't give a damn what anybody believes or embraces at that point. That's not at all what the debate is about, not even remotely. The whole point is to show yourself as the academic philosopher, okay, the peer-reviewed philosopher that you the great philosopher that you aspire to become, and that you are the one with the credentials and the qualifications to be teaching philosophy to your opponent, not getting corrected by him on any count. That's it. So I ask you, brothers and sisters, is this da'wah to Allah or to Muhammad hijab? The answer is clear. The answer is resoundingly clear. At some point, after insisting on asking the guy why is it wrong and repeating it for a few dozen times without even letting him answer, he exclaims, فبهت الذي كفر. بهت الذي كفر. بهت. ما نقول إلا حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل. That's Hijab's modus operandi, brothers and sisters. In every discussion I've heard him have in that place under the tag of da'wah, he does exactly the same thing. In another clip, he engages with some Christian fellow where he seeks to show him that he knows more about different Christian denominations and creeds than his opponent. Okay, they start chatting freely about the issue of divine action and how he does what he does, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then suddenly the debate is about showing that guy that Christians as such, unlike what he claims, believe that everything in the world happens after and according to the will of God. The aim now is not to invite that guy to Islam, no, God forbid, but to show him that Muhammad Hijab knows more about Christianity in general and the Calvinist creed in particular than the guy he's talking to. He tells him about some teachings of Augustine and Calvin, and then states that he thinks he doesn't know his own tradition very well. He says, what I'm saying here is, if you have studied the basics of Christian doctrine, the basics, the Christian guy says the basics. He's surprised, of course, and he has every right to be. And he says, yeah, let me ask you a question. What is the differentiation between Arminianism and Calvinism? I'm not familiar. He says, he responds, says, I'm not familiar with Arminianism. Okay, so there you have it. You don't know the basics of your doctrine. The man was not militant or rude or anything, and yet he had to belittle him. He had to. He couldn't help it. That's how sick hijab is, brothers and sisters. The whole point of his da'wah is to belittle the opponent, to show himself off, to be the most knowledgeable fellow in the room, even if it's done at the expense of the opponent's beliefs and the beliefs of all the people present. I'm the best, I'm the smartest, others be damned. That's it. Supposedly, he mentioned Calvinism in the context of showing that Christianity as such agrees with Islam on the notion that nothing happens in the world except after the will of Allah. This, however, is false, obviously. Okay, first of all, it's false because while Calvinists do believe in predestination, they do not believe in human free will. They are Jabriya, to use our terminology, and they happen to be one of very few denominations in Christianity, very few sects in Christianity that hold that view. The greatest majority of Christians are indeed non-determinists with respect to free will, or in other words, Qadariya. Okay, and that's well known about Christianity. So Calvinists are not on the same page with Muslims with respect to predestination, عقيدة القضاء والقدر إطلاقا, and neither is Augustine for that matter. By the end of his career, Augustine was a deep critic of all theodicies that were proposed in his time, including his own. He ended up holding that humans do create their own sins, not following the will of Allah, not following the will of God. Second, it's a fallacy to claim that the Calvinist view on this issue represents mainstream Christianity, since obviously no two creeds or denominations of Christianity, Protestant or otherwise, do agree in full on that issue. So to challenge a Christian who is not a Calvinist by the claim that he does not know the basics of his own doctrine because he's not aware of the Calvinist position or predestination on predestination, that's nothing but a cheap ploy to boast his own image on camera. Okay, no Christian is required to know about those distinctions from other creeds and denominations so they would qualify as a Christian who knows their own religion. Do you claim, Hijab, that one cannot be a proper Muslim and cannot be said to know their own religion unless they know what the Mu'tazilites creed on Tahsin and Taqbih al-Aqliyain, for example, is? What is that? And in what way can this be an application of the verse ولا تجادلوا أهل الكتاب إلا بالتي هي أحسن إلا الذين ظلموا منهم وقولوا آمنا بالذي أنزل إلينا وأنزل إليكم وإلهنا وإلهكم واحد ونحن له مسلمون. أين هذا من هذا? Even when he's arguing with Muslims from other sects, show them who's the boss. That's the motto. That's the modus operandi. Show them who's boss. That's what da'wah is all about to this man. In another clip at that same corner where he and his friends do those random engagements under the tag of da'wah, he speaks with some Ash'ari guy, and he starts the clip by saying, for example, if you have studied Ash'ari Aqidah, he's talking to an Ash'ari saying this: if you have studied Ash'ari Aqidah, you would have studied something like a Sunusiyyah or a Nasafi creed, or you would have studied Laqani's Jawharat al-Tawheed. You would have studied those things in detail, but those things are based, as you know, as you know, on the kalam of Juwayni and his irshad. But now the question is Al-Juwayni's irshad, is that consistent with the pre-Ash'arites? The earlier Ash'arites, he means. Al-Harith al-Muhasibi and Ibn Kullab. Okay. So what are you trying to do here? What are you trying to do? To get the guy to stick to the doctrine of the earlier Ash'aris? Yeah, that's still not the way of the Sahaba, Hijab. And you know it. So what are you doing there? What are you doing? What kind of da'wah is this? Apart from showing your own knowledge and familiarity with the Ash'ari books and the distinction between the earlier creeds and the later ones, what are you trying to do? The clip does not even end with him convincing the guy or even demonstrating effectively that the older Ash'ari creed is the truth as opposed to the later one. No. Rather, he ends up agreeing with the guy on a detrimentally ambiguous term, that Allah's highness upon his throne and his attributes are not physical. Not physical? What do you mean not physical? Okay. Oh, it's not tafweed, he says, because it was expressed in different words by earlier Ash'arites, the meaning of ulu yani. But it's not physical. So what does it mean? Now he knows what an Ash'ari means when he says not physical in this context, and yet he tells him, he agrees with him that it's not physical. The guy says, all Ash'aris, older and later, have agreed on negating the claim that God has a physical limb, and Hijab jumps, responding immediately, yeah, and so does the Atharis and the Hanbalis. The Atharis and the Hanbalis? What are you even talking about, man? Yes, we never call Allah's hands, for example, limbs, and we never attribute the term physical to them without, of course, showing what it is exactly that we mean by that. But what does an Ash'ari mean when he says we negate a physical limb? It's definitely not the same thing that an Athari would mean when they negate similarity with the limbs of creatures. And you know that. And you know that. The problem, guys, is that he knows that. Okay? So the Salaf and the earlier Ash'aris were not Mufawwida. Fine. As evidently they use different words to express the meaning of ulu, highness. So where does that leave the guy you're talking to? Where does it leave him? That tafweed is not madhab salaf, but rather reinterpretation التأويل. ما هو المشاعرة ما عندهمش إلا مذهبين دول. ليس لديهم إلا هذين القولان. ليس لديهم إلا هذين القولان، التفويض والتأويل. ما فيش، ما تبقاش أشعري إلا إذا كنت بتفوض يا بتأول. He ends up arguing that there is no strict distinction between the creed of the Hanbalis or the Salafis and the creed of the Ash'aris in this regard, and that everybody makes mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. And when the guy when the guy again asks him if he believes Allah is physically upon the throne, he says nobody says physically. We say bidatihi. We don't say physically. We say bidatihi. Allahu Akbar. Okay, so if you yourself are not mufawwid, how would you translate that term bidatihi to a language that this man understands? How would you translate it? How would you translate it? Okay, come on, give us an English translation to the word bidatihi. Give us one. Come up with one. Okay, if you fail to do that, then you are a mufawwid. You are mufawwid in some sense. Okay, because that's what he means when he says physical. Okay, that's what he means when he says physical, and you've agreed with him on dismissing it. When he says physical, he means that he exists bidatihi fawqa al-arsh. That's what he means when he uses the word physical. And you're agreeing to him. So what do you mean when you use the term bidatihi? Then, okay. He then explains what he means by his being an athari, saying that he follows only the Sahaba, strictly. And that he literally goes straight to the books of the Salaf, not caring what scholars from any sect have said afterwards. And that's precisely what's wrong with the Haddadiyya, by the way, the Haddadites. And it's precisely why he ended up being a cocktail of beliefs and doctrines that do not sit consistently with each other. سمك لبن تمر هندي في العقيدة يعني, so to speak. The Haddadis commit the same methodological error when they dismiss old scholars throughout the ages and jump straight to the books of the Salaf from the 4th and the 5th century and the 3rd century, if there's any, to take directly from there. They ended up making up innovative rules on takfir and tabdi' that no scholar or imam of Islam has ever known or used before, claiming to take that right out of the books of the Salaf. Claiming to take that right out of the books of the Salaf. Is the exact same arrogance, al-kibr, with respect to the legacy of Islamic scholars, but taking a rather different route in its case. Rather, in his case, a rather different route. The man finds that they're all equal in not truly representing the way of the Salaf, So none of them should be taken as a lead and a guide to understand what the true creed of the Salaf was. No scholar is safe from having made mistakes in their creeds of belief. No scholar. Only the Salaf were free from that. So how did you learn what the Salaf believed aslan? That's a fallacy of interpretation, guys, since obviously no one will know and understand the true creed of the Salaf better than their immediate students, and the students of those students and their students after them, and so on. So we need the legacy of the A'imma, of the Salafi tradition throughout the ages, throughout the centuries, as much as we need the books of the Salaf from the earliest centuries. And not only do we need that legacy, we need to take the scholars of our time who inherited that tradition to teach it to us the way it was taught to them. The way it was taught to them. Circumventing this chain of scholarship and apprenticeship and opting to learn straight from the books of the first centuries without acknowledging the authority of any particular imams from centuries after, in knowing the true ways of the authors of these books, is a methodological innovation, bid'ah manhajiyya, that suffices to put this man squarely outside of the zone of Ahl Sunnah, خارج دائرة أهل السنة كلية, and to place him right next to the Haddadiyya. The Salafi creed is not a field for experimentation and philosophical reinterpretation, brothers and sisters. We don't understand books of the Salaf according to our own views of what makes more sense rationally. We understand them according to the way that the Imams and the major scholars of the creed explain them to their students, all the way down to this day. Okay? If you are indeed an Athari or a Salafi, that's how you learn about the Salaf, about their books and their ways in the first place. You don't qualify as Salafi because you take straight from the books of the Salaf, but because you're a committed student, apprentice to scholars of the way of the Salaf in your time. It's not the same thing. Not remotely. Knowing philosophy at an academic capacity does not qualify you to read straight from those books, Hijab, and to fault all scholars of your time when you disagree with them. Quite the contrary. We're not telling you to be a follower of Ibn Taymiyyah alone, or of Sheikh Rabi' as you snidely comment. Obviously not. We're advising you to get off your high horse, to admit your limits as a student of Aqidah, and to acknowledge your need to study the creed of the Salaf the way it is supposed to be studied, because I'm sorry, brother, but you're alien to the way of the Salaf and the Sahaba. Absolutely alien. A peer-reviewed research in a journal of the philosophy of religion does not put you on a par with the major imams of the tradition as you seem to believe. It doesn't qualify you or anybody else to pick and choose from the articles of Aqidah and Manhaj that students have been learning from them throughout the centuries, from those imams. It's not because we think that Ibn Taymiyyah, for example, was smarter than you, which he was, by the way, but it's not because of that. That we think you can't fault him in Aqidah and Manhaj. This is not why. This is not the reason we think you can't fault him in Aqeedah and Manhaj. It's because we observe an ijma' of Ahlul Hadith since his own time on his imamah and his commitment to the ways of the Salaf as he learned them from his predecessors, and on his alignment with the creed in all his statements of Aqeedah and Manhaj. That's why. He did not learn that creed by studying philosophy first and then jumping up straight to the books of the Salaf to take right from there. So, as you seem to think, no, he didn't do that. Nobody did that. No Imam of Ahl Sunnah did that. That's definitely not the way we learn the true way of the Salaf and the Sahaba in belief and method. That's the way you invent your own creed and attribute it to the Sahaba by reinterpretation. Attribute it to the Sahaba. It's the way Ahlul Kalam invent their own creeds. Every sect on its own. Creating your own philosophical system first, from the bottom up, and then forcing the athar of the Salaf to fit that system by interpretation. That's the way of Jahmiyyah, Hijab, not of Ahl Sunnah. إطلاقا. So don't be so proud with your academic status as a student of philosophy. It incriminates you in the eyes of true Salafis, not the other way around. The point is, brothers and sisters, there is a fundamental difference between the ways of the Salaf and the ways of Jahmiyyah and Mutafalsifa in addressing kuffar with da'wah. The tonality, the rhetorical performance, the attitude, the choice of setup and context for practicing da'wah, all such aspects depend entirely on the initial assumptions that you have regarding the people you're engaging with and regarding the kinds of reasons they have for rejecting or dismissing Islam. Those initial assumptions follow, in turn, from your beliefs about knowledge in this subject matter and the way that it is acquired. If you're a Salafi, a true follower of the way of the Salaf, then you know that the people you're addressing are not ignorant when it comes to the question of whether or not they were created and are being sustained by the only being worthy of worship and absolute submission. They're not in need for someone to offer them evidence or proof or premises and postulates upon which to establish that knowledge deductively or inductively or theoretically, as though they had no trace of it in advance. No. We're not calling on to people to accept the philosophical doctrine of metaphysics that some of us have come up with in an attempt to prove the Maker and to deduce His attributes. No. Al-Da'wa ilallah is not a philosophical proposition. It's not something that we achieve by publishing papers in peer-reviewed journals of philosophy. Rather, they need to be shown the sheer falsity and ridiculousness of their beliefs and their ways, and exposed to the true reasons why they stick to those beliefs, with stern warnings of an eternity in hell if they did not, as the Quran addresses them. We don't propose a philosophy of our own in da'wah. Rather, we blast away whatever philosophies they embrace underneath their false beliefs. That's how the Sahaba and their students practiced da'wah, and it has nothing to do with the way that Ahlul Kalam do it. Consider the theory of knowledge that puts you in a position where you have to demonstrate the rational validity of your belief, proposing syllogistic arguments to establish it upon some metaphysical premises, and you will see right away that you contradict yourself when you resort to assertive stances and forceful rhetoric in public debates. You have no right, by virtue of the very nature of the kinds of arguments you adopt, to scold your opponent if he insists he has reasons to think that your argument is non sequitur. Quit fooling yourself into believing that Ibn Sina's Burhan is irrefutable. There's no such thing in philosophy as an irrefutable propositional argument from metaphysical premises. No such thing. Ask your professors at Oxford and they would tell you just that. A propositional argument by definition is the proposal of a conclusion based on a sequence of premises. So if all the premises hold true, the result of the conclusion from contemplating those premises together would be true by entailment. Now the problem with Kalam argumentation is that it starts by presuming that the conclusion is unknown to the opponent, as they claim the case to be. So to proceed to achieve that knowledge syllogistically or dialectically, as the scholastic tradition would teach, the arguer has to start from a metaphysical theory that he thinks the opponent or the philosopher he addresses with the argument would accept according to the tradition. A theory about reality or about existence, coexistence. Okay? If, of course, that theory happens to be the mainstream metaphysical doctrine in the academy at the time, like the Aristotelian metaphysics was back in the day, then the argument would be more powerful, since there would be a smaller chance that the opponent could reject its premises than would be the case if the theory itself was to fall under his scrutiny. After all, the job of an apologist for the religion is, as we explained, to demonstrate that the faith he embraces or champions does not contradict the mainstream science of the academy, because if it does, then it would be automatically rejected as irrational according to the tradition. What Ibn Sina did, though, is attempt to provide his own metaphysics based on his own view of first principles, thinking that since it doesn't resort to any claims about the world at its entirety, then it provides more solid grounds for his proposition. He forgot, however, that the epistemology of the tradition itself implies that he has to come up with a theory that draws a strict categorization or categorical distinction between things of this world and the Maker he seeks to prove to be out of the world or to be not of this world, if he wishes for it to be solid, rational grounds for his belief in the Lord that Muslims believe in. Thus it turned out that it wouldn't suffice, according to the tradition, to just assert that all things in existence are contingent except for one single being that is beyond and above all things and is incomparable to everything else. He had to prove that to be the case too. So he had no choice but to suggest certain categorizations of what it means to be contingent, and align that with the way that things of the world appear to be. He thus had to resort to the Aristotelian notion of composition, at-tarkib. So the question, how can he know that the whole world is contingent, gets its answer on his metaphysics by saying, well, because all things that are composed of parts, or that have attributes that could, in terms of rational possibility, have been any different than the way that they are, all such things are by definition contingent, or dependent, as Hijab insisted on calling them in his Hyde Park debate with the atheist guy. They require an external agent to make them the way that they are. So, while the notion of contingency and necessity does have a self-evident fact underlying it, okay, one such fact that cannot be refuted, okay, that really cannot be refuted at all, The metaphysical categorization or theory thus described by Ibn Sina and of course by Hijab on his tale, as he was forced by the tradition itself to employ in his argument, is not self-evident and is indeed refutable. As Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah has demonstrated, and as we have demonstrated in more places than one. And as a result of taking that step, he had no choice but to embrace ta'til for exactly the same reason that mutakallimun had to. His argument, as it turns out, is not and cannot be any better than the cosmological arguments he initially thought were inadequate. The same miserable condition is true of every propositional argument that an apologist or a mutakallim may come up with in that context and under that tradition, precisely because it is bound by the epistemic theory of that tradition. Such theory we should not accept to begin with. When Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah criticized the cosmological argument, saying that we don't need to resort to proving that the entire world is hadith, just a single thing that starts to exist would suffice in our experience, he said that precisely to drop the epistemic commitments of the Greek tradition that the mutakallimin were bound to. Okay, the tradition commits a philosopher to embrace some theory about all of existence, the classes of existing things, and the natures or characteristics that explain them being the way that they are in reality, wherever they exist, whenever they exist. And thus it forces him to demonstrate his consistency if he chooses to believe in some maker that has created the world in its entirety, thereby adding a new category to existing things in his theory, which is that maker. Okay? He has to apologize for such an addition to his metaphysics, one way or another. So the best he can do is propose that it follows from the theory itself. Because if not from the theory, then despite of it, and that cannot be accepted when the theory is by definition a theory of existence, it's a theory of all things. Okay? This is why they are required by the tradition to address the matter with propositional metaphysical arguments one way or another. Ibn Taymiyyah, however, showed that just the huduth of one thing in the world is sufficient proof for the existence of a maker that is not himself a creature or a contingent or dependent thing, because otherwise we would suffer from a regressive causes or creators. This, brothers and sisters, is not his way to establish knowledge of the creator we believe in, okay, in minds that don't really know it, that are actually ignorant of it. No. Using deduction, qiyas shumul, or analogy, qiyas tamthil, or induction, istiqra, as the tradition goes, no. None of that. It's his way to remind a denier of his existence, of the existence of Allah, of the ridiculous entailments that would follow from claiming that he came into being without a creator, or claiming that that creator could be yet another creature of this world, okay, natural law or nature or whatever, or that creator does not have sufficient power or does not have will to make us the way that he made us, rather than otherwise. Okay, and when he employed the notion of contingency and necessity, he used it in exactly the same manner as he used the notion of huduth. He showed the ridiculous entailments that follow from believing that a single contingent thing in this world may have come to be the way that it is, without a necessary being that chooses to make it the way that it is rather than otherwise, in addition, of course, to showing the regress that denying that being would entail. That's how we argue against an atheist in the Salafi tradition. Okay? We don't propose anything. Nothing is proposed here. We don't suggest some metaphysical characterization of existing things. Nothing commits us to a sophist theory of knowledge that dictates that there should be some grand metaphysical theory about the world and the proposition of some intrinsic characteristic in it, all of its parts, that makes us judge it by some form of induction to be created or to be contingent. No. None of that. We Muslims do not and should not ascribe to the tradition thus described. Those who do ascribe to it would invariably and necessarily end up championing a maker that is merely a mental construct that cannot exist in reality, as we've explained in previous lectures. Hijab and his followers thus need to understand that the reason their method of da'wah differs from the Quran is because the content itself, because the subject matter of the da'wah itself is different from the Quran. Not because the culture of the day implies a certain approach in addressing people that differs from the discourse of the Quran. No. You are not doing da'wah to Islam, guys. You are not doing da'wah to Islam. No matter how much you like to think that you are. You're preaching your own philosophical doctrines of theism, as they have come to be called in modern literature. It's not that if given the context that you guys are in, the Sahaba would follow the exact same methods you choose to deliver the message of Islam. No. The Sahaba wouldn't invent their own metaphysical doctrine the way that Ibn Sina did and then propose it to atheists in philosophical debates. Yes, Ibn Sina invented a metaphysical doctrine of his own, and to use his arguments in debates would be to call upon people to embrace that doctrine, not to embrace Islam. Okay? And that's precisely what Hijab does in almost every public engagement he has with the atheists. Even the mere notion of God, the mere mention of God in a full hour debate that he had with a guy, as we've seen earlier, was prohibited. He was the one who prohibited it. Why? Because he thinks that needs to be the subject for another debate. On that particular occasion, he was only interested in establishing the postulate, as he would call it, the postulate. Okay? That a state of affairs where only contingent things exist in reality cannot be true. But when did you ever see him engage in such a debate, guys? That other debate. A debate where he addresses someone who already embraces Ibn Sina's metaphysical classification of existing things, and he wishes to get them to admit that notion of abstract necessity achieved by the Quran is indeed Allah, the Lord that we Muslims worship. Never. Not once. And you probably never will see him do that. You know why? Because he knows that he can only do that on pain of contradiction. Because it's an area where things get even darker, as he will find himself forced to commit ta'til for the same reasons that Ibn Sina did. The Lord that we Muslims worship, and that he claims to be worshipping to, is indeed a person that has the attributes of a person. He creates things at will. He utters words at will. He does things all the time. He also has distinct parts, okay? Parts, each of which is identified by a name and a meaning of its own. Real parts. A real person with real parts and real deeds that follow his will. That's what the Salaf quoted to the Ash'ari guy believed. Okay? However, the metaphysics of Ibn Sina that he preaches and argues with cannot allow for that. There's no room in it for that, as we explained in fair detail in previous lectures. He contradicts himself when he claims he is not a mu'attil. Okay? He has to commit ta'til. So the problem is not just in the method, but in the tradition that dictates that method. The same tradition that Hijab is so proud to have become an active part of and a published academic participant in. That tradition of philosophy and metaphysical theory. فما نقول إلا حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم.